not expand too much. You can expand, you can ask me to expand on whatever, but
We are live with our faith discussion with Eric Endres. Welcome. And
hello.
make sure that my video, there we go. All right. So, Eric, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about kind of your own faith journey. So, why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us about your faith journey?
You're getting, I got to say, you're getting amazing internet reception and connection up on the summit of Everest or wherever you are there.
This
I'm
background is in
impressed.
honor of you, actually. This is Mount Rainier in the background.
Oh,
So,
okay. I should know that.
I
But
figured I would be
I,
floating somewhere above your head.
oh, great. Oh, that's a little bit weird, but no. My name is Eric Endres, Eric Herman Endres, and I'm glad to be here and talk with Steve and anyone else about my faith journey. I appreciate that call it a faith journey still, even though, spoiler alert, I've left formal belief in religion because I do think that it still involved a lot of what I consider faith, right? I had to correct at one point. I'm jumping ahead here, but I had to correct at one point my last bishop of my ward. After I left, he posted a thing on Facebook about several people he knew had lost their faith, and I know he was referring to. I was one of those people, right? And I just send a thing. I said I didn't lose my faith. I lost beliefs, and I respectfully, I think it took a lot of faith to get to where I got to, or a type of faith, So I respect the word faith, and I think we use it in various ways in life, whether it's a formal religious type of thing or just waking up every morning and getting out of bed. So, anyways, now that I've spoiled where it ends up, let's get there. And it's a little bit of a long journey, but I'll try to keep it very relevant to the big points, and you can press on things later if you want to. But I grew up in Buffalo, New York, in a what I suppose would be considered an agnostic family, German heritage, free thinkers and beer drinkers, right? And my mother, we prayed at night a couple of, when I was little, and I would pray for my stuffed animals and stuff like that. But we never really went to church. Occasionally on Christmas, if there were friends of my parents that invited them to their particular place. So, and that would ended up being 3 or 4 times as I was growing up. But in a way, I kind of relished that I didn't have anything particular, because at the age of about 12 or so, I was free in a certain sense to explore whatever that meant to me, right? And I had no predetermined basis for that, so it was a pretty wide open thing to explore, and that started in some strange ways that I'm just going to tell you about because it's part of my story. And it seems absurd now in some respects, but some of it is actually relevant to what comes later. My friend and I, we were, into horror movies and heavy metal. And so at some point I dusted off we had a Bible in our house. We weren't, believers or practicing any religion, but every house had a Bible, right? And I remember dusting it off, blowing the dust off it and looking through, and we were looking up references for Satan. I'm not kidding you. Like, we were like, this is cool. Yeah. It was dumb. And I was 12. Right. But it kind of shortly dawned on me that if you're reading this book in any sense, Satan is not the good guy. Like, he doesn't win in the end, right? So that it kind of like, okay, this is dumb. I don't really
What the
need
purpose
to
was for looking at those looking up those references for Satan.
Just because it was some dumb interest relating to horror movies and heavy metal and that kind of thing, right? We heard songs about it. Whoa, what's this all about? That kind of thing. And but in the process of that, I remember, actually reading some of this Bible thing. Like, what is this? What is this all about? Obviously, I'd heard of, everyone has some frame of reference for what that all is about if you live in this country, right? And I remember, kind of latching on to this Jesus dude, right? And what he was saying, and saying, I really like a lot of what I'm reading here. And so over the next few years, I would say I developed this kind of personality that was kind of a Zen, hipster, stoner, Christianish something or other. Like, I don't even know how to describe it, but I would be the very oddball at a keg party at the Tree in high school, where everyone's talking about the next party or the last one, which is what happens at a lot of those. But I'd be like, what about God? What does it mean? What is the universe all about? I'd be that kind of guy, right? But so fast forward a few more years after that point, and a lot of, to be honest, a lot of what fueled my exploration, or I shouldn't say fueled, but accompanied my exploration of those kind of ideas was drugs, psychedelic drugs, and the first time that I ever felt like I felt some presence of what God might be was in 10th grade in high school, when my friend and I took 6 hits of acid before we went into school, which I don't recommend ever to anybody. Okay. And there's 2 things I remember about that specifically, or 3 things, I suppose. First of all, my 3rd period science class was the best science class ever. It was just, we were studying cells and using microscopes to look, and that was just amazing. But then 5th period English class was the worst experience ever of my life, really, at that point. And the thing that I vaguely remember, it's the kind of thing I've tried to rethink in my mind at different points, but is looking around the room and seeing all these people, and we all, I just was drawn back to how we were all just children, and we were just beings, and just trying to understand this experience that we're going through. And I remember seeing my friend Tommy, who was my best friend in like kindergarten and 1st grade, but now we weren't really friends anymore. And I was just like, why is that? Like, what's going on with it? Just that kind of thing. But it really devolved into a breakdown of ego and sanity for that hour or so. And it was hellish. But also the feeling I got from looking around and, looking at my friend Tommy, and was this feeling of love, and just wanting, why can't we all just love each other, that kind of thing. And it was probably as innocent and naive as it sounds, but it was a powerful feeling in a good way.
But you still that to be a spiritual experience? How do you?
Yeah, of course, sure, yeah. And something about that, connected me, or I wanted to connect with the things I've been reading about, love one another, and God is love, and all of that stuff. And it's more than there's more to it than I want to get into now, but that was the first experience that I would equate to some kind of visionary-ish spiritual experience. And I'd have been about 14 or 15, I think. So fast forward a few years, and I had gotten really into, I still wasn't interested in joining any kind of church or anything. I remember going to a few things here and there, church meetings of different denominations. And I was really into prophecy, though, Bible prophecy, was a thing at the time. I don't know if you're familiar with Hal Lindsey, the late great Planet Earth. There were these book series that came out in the 80s or so that were very popular, and I got really into that. You know, this idea that now is the time of the end, and I remember subscribing to the Plain Truth magazine, which was the Worldwide Church of God, Herbert W. Armstrong, and their whole thing was about that. These are the end times, Bible prophecy. Let's connect Daniel and all these things into what's happening today, right? And so I had that sort of as the thing that I was loosely connected to, although it amounted to subscribing to a free magazine. That's what it amounted to, right? But you know, as the years went on, I kind of got more serious about wanting to have something more meaningful, or that kind of tied a lot of things together, right? And I remember this would have been the late 80s, early 90s, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had TV commercials on cable channels. And whatever the commercials were, it was probably some, you know, treacly heart cell kind of thing, right? But whatever they were, what grabbed me was the name that I saw. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was literally seeing that name that, you know, struck my interest, and in saying, oh, hey, they believe in Jesus Christ. I'm kind of I'm okay with that, or I'm down with that. And also latter days. Yes, I think these are the latter days, right? I've been reading about all this prophecy, right? And I remember saying to myself, well, you know what? Wasn't my friend Bob saying a few weeks ago that some Mormons came to his house and he chased them away? Yeah, I remember that. And that was the Book of Mormon churches. Yeah, okay, that's this group. Well, you know what? When they come to my house, I'm going to talk to them. And then sure enough, I don't know how long it was. Could have been weeks, could have been months. At some point, the doorbell rings. And I open the door, and there's two guys with little things. Hi, we're missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I said something very much like, oh, I was hoping you guys would come over. I wanted to talk to you.
Now,
which I assumed happened all the time, right? That, you know, that's the reaction they always get.
About how old were you with this?
I'd have been 20 years old.
Oh, okay.
20 years old. Yep. And they came in, and, you know, a lot of things appealed to me initially, right? This would have been 1990. For one thing, the history of it all happened an hour and a half from where I lived my whole life, in Palmyra, New York. I lived in Buffalo, and something about, whoa, I never even heard of this movement or this thing that happened there. And but even more so, some of the things they were talking about, you know, about, I'll try to get a little specific here, about that ongoing revelation. That was a thing at, you know, degrees of glory. You know, everybody is saved in different measures, right? And these were things that over the past, I don't know, 5-6 years of my life, that it kind of, mainstream Christianity turned me off in a lot of respects. For one thing, a lot of it was equated with the TV preachers of the time, who many of which ended up in sex scandals or money scandals and things like that, right? So, but also, I you know, there was this idea of you're saved or you're effed, right? I'm not going to say the word, but, and I never liked that as a concept either. I said, well, what if you grew up in as a tribe in Africa, you never even heard about Jesus? Doesn't matter, too bad, you know? And you know, that's I would say that's an extreme position of mainstream Christians, but some of them, that is the position. I know that because I've had conversations with people that they, I find it unfathomable, but that's another subject for another time. Anyways, suffice to say that did not appeal to me. And something about this other story, it's a wonderful story. A 14-year-old boy goes out and asks God, it has the audacity to ask God and expect that he'll be answered, and that's something that over the years I had thought, why not? Why did Scripture stop 2,000 years ago? So I had a lot of the same questions I could relate, and I grew up in the same relative area, which it
like
helped a little bit.
You were hanging, you were hanging on to all the questions and concerns about religion that, the missionaries were.
And it was here we go, golden convert, right? Is what the term is, honestly, for what I was. And one of the things that they left me a Book of Mormon, and I read pieces of that, and I remember especially early being intrigued by the Doctrine and Covenants and some of the like esoteric kind of things about intelligences and things like that. So that stuff really, really appealed to me. And also, I'll be honest, like Mormonism had this kind of cool sci-fi Indiana Jones aspect to it, right? Digging up hidden artifacts and, finding stuff like that. And so it had that kind of element to it that was also appealing to me at the time. So after I think about 2 or 3 months, I had to make decisions to stop doing certain things that I had been doing. I didn't want to join if I wasn't going to commit 100%. And so I did that. And I was active for about a year. I don't know exactly, 9-10 months to a year, somewhere around there. And then through various circumstances, did a thing that was forbidden, let's say, that I had done prior to joining the church a lot. I don't need to get specific, and then I remember feeling guilty to come back and feeling like if I continue doing this thing, which I did, of course, the dumb thing is that, nobody's perfect, and to a place that is viewed as a place of spiritual growth and healing and everything, I should have gone back. Like that was exactly the thing that somebody should do, right? But suffice to say, I did not go back. I became essentially completely inactive for the next 5-6 years, I think. And then fast forward to the end of that 5-6 years, and I was almost dead and in a ditch, metaphorically, but sometimes literally. And I was an addict and a junkie, and thankfully and fortunately, was willing to follow a recovery program at a certain point. And as part of that, I said, well, I should go back to a church again, right? And it's not that I had ever stopped believing in the church that I joined. So I kind of picked up where I left off in a lot of senses, and that would have been 1996, the end of 1996. Okay, so now we're going to super jump forward here because, to what I already spoiled. A couple of points along the way. In 1999, I met your aunt, my dear wife, late wife, Roseanne, and on a website, a mormonmatchmaker.com or some kind of thing like that. At the time, it was a novelty. Oh, wow. And of course now it's like, oh yeah, my brother met someone online too. It's not a big deal anymore, but back then it was. And we had a great life together for the most part in the next 13 years. And I mentioned this in the last thing. One of my big credits was singing in the choir at the Palmyra Temple dedication, which was a great moment, a great feeling. And I joked that I could have played bongos on Gordon B. Hinckley's head. I was standing right there. He was like, but I chose not to.
Was that's when you were still living out there, I assume? And
yes.
You were still single at that time?
That would have been right before we got married. Yeah, it would have been April 6th of 2000. And we were engaged and got married in May 6th of 2000. So a month later, we got married. Yeah. But Roseanne at the time, yes, was out west and I was still there. And we had met, we knew, it's great to meet people online, but you must meet them in person first. You really do. I've heard horror stories of, oh, they're just so perfect. And then there's something about the chemistry of being in person that you need to know about first. So that's my little dating advice that you didn't pay for, but you get that extra for free here.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah. So I'm gonna fast forward all the way to 2016, and then we can double back on some things leading up to that. In September of 2016, I sent in my papers to officially resign from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it was May of that year. I don't know the date or whatever, but May of that year that it was solidified in my mind that I did not believe anymore. So between those points was just a period of, should I keep going, or a lot of questions that I had to kind of resolve for myself and for my family, and thinking about things like that. I don't know how much you want to get into what led to that, but
yeah, well, we appreciate the story getting in. What's the story getting out? And
sure.
Timeline points in there too.
It'll be hard to identify. Like, I remember a lot of things right near the end, but it would kind of be unfair to put too much emphasis on those end things, because it might seem like they had a lot of weight, and they did, but they had the weight they did only because of a lot of things that led up to that point. I'll mention them still, and just in passing, we don't have to go too deep into any of this, but I do remember when I came back to the church in 1996, that, hey, guess what? The internet is a thing now, which it wasn't in 1990, right? And I loved it for the sense of my faith and my belief, because you could find all kinds of great things on there. I wanted that Indiana Jones experience. I was looking for more things, in history and how they connected and anciently, and all these ideas. For many years, I consider myself an amateur apologist online. I would argue or discuss, whatever the particular day or person might have described it as, but I do remember fairly early on, maybe 97 or 98, coming across some things that I really had never come across before in that first year or so that I joined the church. And there's not a lot of reasons why I would have come across some of that. Some of the things about polygamy, about the race. Obviously, I knew about some of that. You can't be an American and not have some idea that Mormons practiced polygamy at some point, right? But there's all these kind of answers that you get from other members and sometimes from your leaders at church, or maybe not even answers, or things that you hear in classes or whatever, that, polygamy was only practiced by a small percentage of the brethren, which is true, and only because the widows needed help, which turns out wasn't really the case in as described. And then there's all kinds of things that they'll never tell you in formal church about, letters that Joseph Smith sent to prospective women and how he never told his wife. And, there's all these other elements of it that I only first heard about in the late 90s, after coming back for a couple of years, right? And I think an important thing is, by that point, I was solidified in my commitment to be part of this thing, that I wasn't willing to let any of that really bother me, which can be good. And I wasn't willing to look into any of it too deeply. I do remember seeing some things on some websites, and I kind of scanned over. Oh, that doesn't sound good. I don't like the sound of that. And then quickly, I got to find, where's Jeff Lindsay or somebody that's going to give me some kind of answer to make me not think in a questionable way about that. But I will say the Book of Abraham was a thing that earlier in the 2000s I first heard about, and this was, it had already been an issue for a while. I don't remember if it was the 80s or 90s or actually I think it was the 60s when the scrolls were found again, or something like that. But it was much later that it really started to be a conversation, that would hit the internet in a significant way. I'm sure the Tanners and other people were talking about it, but and that was one of those things that, first kind of jolted me in a sense, like because it was hard to get around the specifics of that, and really, well, maybe there's a missing scroll, except that doesn't hold up. Maybe it was, a lot of things. Ultimately, the answer that is still the answer today, catalyst theory, is kind of what's left, and kind of what I had to hold on to. And I was willing to hold on to that. I did, for several years after that point. Okay, maybe it's just, or maybe there's some mnemonic device within the things. Again, this appealed to the Indiana Jones, right? It's some kind of secret message in there. That is if you read every third letter, that spells out the Book of Abraham, right? I don't know. So, and I think at a certain point, and this would have been much later, things like evolution started to be a question. I've always considered myself a skeptical person, except for this religion that I joined. I've kind of let a lot of things slide, but it was hard to get around the overwhelming, evidence that science has presented to describe that. So what you do, I read people like Stephen Peck. I don't know if you're familiar with that, BYU biologist. He's still a believer, but he had I thought a very interesting way of reconciling evolution with Mormon thought, right? And so that's what I did too for a while. And then I think at a certain point, somebody, I can't remember who it was. It was a woman, her and her husband. I think I know who it is. I'm not going to say who it is. I was having dinner with their family, and she was not a Mormon or anyway, but she knew I was. We worked together with what I do in music. She was related to media in that form. I'm not going to say any more about it, but I remember, she was super respectful and super nice about, oh, it's interesting that you're a Mormon or something, and something about, yeah, we looked into that. We just couldn't get past the idea of Joseph Smith being on the level, or I can't, it's not important how she worded it, but I do remember responding to her and saying, everything that I've ever read about him does not sit in a way that tells me he was a con man. I remember saying that very specifically, and I remember later thinking about it and thinking, do I really know that? Have I really looked into that? Pretty much everything I've read about him, for the most part, is from church sources or from apologetic sources that are supporting him. And this is getting closer to 2016 at this point, maybe 2014 or something, 2013. And I started to just view certain things with the question in mind. Can I look at that? For one thing, recognizing the whole time that Mormonism is an extraordinary claim, right? It just is, right? It's an extraordinary claim. And what does that mean? Well, it means that I don't necessarily expect there to be evidence for it, right? Because of the nature of it. It's spiritual in nature. You have to pray to know it's true. You have to, scriptures are come from God and all that stuff, right? But also, we've had a lot of extraordinary claims in the world, and at some point, can they be explained as well, or as I came to feel, better by a person or persons, I'm just going to say it, and lying or being fraudulent about that claim. And to me, that's, the more I looked into all of that, and the more that was very clear. And I'm just going to mention a couple of points real quick. We can expand on it if you want. When I realized, for one thing, a lot of quote unquote anti-Mormon claims over the years, you find out that a lot of them are in some sense true, and in some ways worse than what they were described as, right? And the church has acknowledged several of them in the essays recently. But one of them was about Joseph Smith being a treasure digger and being convicted of a crime, convicted of crimes, right? And then at some point I read the 1826 trial reports. Are you familiar with that? You know what I'm talking about? I want to say it's Bainbridge, New York, or I don't remember the name of the town, but there exists somebody discovered them, I want to say early 2000s, fairly recently, in the archives of this town in central New York somewhere, where there was a trial. Joseph Smith was there, and you can read the actual testimony of several people talking about his, what happened, right? And he was convicted, found guilty, but it was let go, or he left town or something. So but the particular point about that is he was using a seer stone to find treasure, which was it was a thing of the time, that, early 1800s, late 1700s, that there was some idea that there was treasure everywhere, right? Hidden treasure buried underground. And certain people had some visions or some ability to discover where these treasures were. And
I have to interrupt for one thing, because
sure.
I think it's a very unique moment. Today I was reading a news article that was talking about a buried treasure in England So I think it's interesting that you bring this up, that back in that time period, people were looking around
it's still, there is buried treasure in the world. Yeah.
The buried treasure that was
Sure.
found in particular instances. It was just after World War II. And it was just a huge, amount of loot, 800 years old or something like that. So anyway,
Nice.
I just
Sweet.
There are apparently said stashes. Maybe we should be looking for them. But anyway, keep going.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say that there is not still buried treasure. There is probably a lot of it around the world, right? But this was a thing that, was a thing of the time and of the region. It was, and Joseph Smith was one of the guys. This was part of their job that their family, would make some money from, where he said he'd have these visions and he could find this treasure for you using this seer stone. And every time they would, here's the treasure, let's dig here. And they dig. Where's the treasure? Oh, because we did something slightly wrong, it sunk deeper into the earth. Right. That was the answer. And, my concern isn't even so much about the treasure seeking and that, although, I think most rational people would look at that and say it was a con, right? My concern was that this was 1826 and he was using this seer stone, which, as it turns out, was the exact same seer stone that a year later, 2 years later, he used to claim, he was translating these gold plates, right? So, I mean, most believers could say and would say, and I did say, well, he just changed. His heart changed, his mind changed, right? There's a great story with Emma's father, where he describes how, at one point Joseph Smith said, yes, it's all a phony. I don't have any of this ability. I'm going to stop doing this. I give up. I'm sorry. And apparently that was true for a little while. And then within a year, he was doing this other thing, right? And if it was just this one incident, I could say, okay, he changed or something changed, right? But I also think there's a mountain of other evidence of what came after that speaks to, a person of his age and being a character who this was his livelihood to, in some sense, deceive people to make some money from them, that he found a different way to do that. Involving religion. L. Ron Hubbard said, 100 years later that, when his book sales started to dry up, he said, well, what now, we got to make a religion out of it, because that's where the real money is, right? But and then it all ties in also with, I think, the first very important incident, or one of the first in Mormonism, was the 116 pages. And there's a lot I'd have to talk about this. I'm gonna keep it brief here because, but that was the first revelations that he gave. That I don't think they're numbered first in D&C, but they came first, involving that and Martin Harris. And this was something that, even as a believer in the church, when, every 4 years or something, you'd cover the D&C, and they might do a topic on the 116 pages. And boy, it was one of those things where I would just like, hum, because as I read this account, it just sounds like somebody who is making a very sketchy attempt at redirecting something that went wrong in the thing that they're trying to put over. And there's so many, and in fact, retrofitting the whole story of oh, it's okay, it's all right, don't worry, we lost these pages. Guess what? God knows everything. And in fact, he knows everything so well that 2,000 years ago, he had somebody write this whole other set of things, knowing that this thing would happen, And then, well, okay, why didn't he do that with the Book of Abraham? Why didn't he include something in the scrolls that actually referred to Abraham, then there's 100 different ways that this skews screwy to me that I'm not gonna list here. But and then the other thing about that, as I later looked into the Book of Mormon, which as I mentioned last time, I'll mention again, everything for me came backwards to that. Like, it started later with the Book of Abraham, problems with that, and I still held on to the Book of Mormon. That's the core. I can still believe in that until I couldn't, until it went back to that. And, of course, one of the main issues of the Book of Mormon is anachronisms, right? Which is, I think, a big problem. I also reverse anachronisms. There's things that you should expect to see in there that aren't in there, right? That's the other side of that. But speaking of just the anachronisms themselves, the common apologist argument against that is that it was a loose translation, right? Horses aren't horses. They could have been tapirs, right? And then, something that looked, it was a beast, a largish beast, and maybe people put saddles on them and rode them around. And the best way that Joseph could describe it was a horse. That's all. That's what he knew. He didn't know to write tapir, right? And that's a decent explanation. It is. But the 116 pages story locks him into a tight translation. And I assume you know what I mean, loose and tight translation, right? But because it's implying that the reason that he couldn't just retranslate the Book of Mormon from the plates was not that it would be fudgy. He could have said it would be fudgy. In fact, I find it super interesting that he didn't, but I have an explanation for that. That would have gotten him off the hook. He could have said, well, I'm going to retranslate, but you know what? It's not going to be the same. It's going to be, it's kind of a wishy-washy process. I got to get inspiration. He did not say that. The reason that the Lord gave was that we can't redo this because Joseph will give an exact retranslation, but the agents of Satan will then take that original thing and make changes to it, which will look different from this exact translation. To me, that is, that was one of those, oh boy. And it's everything I'm saying is there's some conjecture on my part. I totally acknowledge that, right? But conjecture, when you put it into the framework of, this is a con artist, and I'll give him huge props. I think he was one of the best ever, right? A con artist putting forth something fraudulent, what would it look like? What would you expect to see? And in my view, those were things, as I looked more and more into it, I kept seeing things that looked like things that I would expect to see if somebody was doing that, including the DNC messages, which in my opinion were to placate both Martin Harris and Lucy Harris, which is why I think he said that he would retranslate it exactly, because I think Martin was expecting that. If you note, all of the early descriptions of translation described him looking at the stone in the hat, and a very specific phrase would come up, and he would dictate that. Somebody would write it down, and only when they wrote it down exactly right would that phrase go away and come back. I believe that's what Joseph Smith told them about how it works. Well, how else would they know that? They weren't allowed to look in the hat and all that stuff, right? So he had to tell them that, and that's why I think. And again, that's a speculative thing on my part, right? But there's other aspects of that event, but looking at that 1826 trial, looking at the 116 pages, these were huge things that spoke to me of the kind of thing I would expect to see if this was put forth as a fraudulent measure, and of all of the content itself of the book, the anachronisms, all the various problems, the copying of italics from the King James version. There's numerous things in the Book of Mormon that the more I read it, the more I read about it, just felt really, really problematic to me. And it wasn't until that point, though, that I could, like I said, the later stuff bothered me. Book of Abraham, polygamy, polyandry, that stuff really bothered me, especially the happiness letter. I don't know if you know what that is. I had quoted this quote from Joseph Smith. I saw it in a church lesson book once, where at the beginning of one of my talks in church, every couple of years hey, Eric, do a talk, happiness is the object and design of existence and will lead to the end thereof if we but follow the Lord, something like that, right? Have you heard that before? You must have. I guarantee
Sure, yeah.
it.
Yep.
So, and then I found out at a certain point where that came from. And it's called the Happiness Letter, and it's what he wrote to, boy, I don't remember who, one of his prospective wives. And it's super, super manipulative, and it's, in my opinion, it's awful. Anyways, those things really, really bother me. The later things in the church's history, destroying the press, what's it called?
Nauvoo Expositor.
Thank you. Nauvoo Expositor. Which print, and at a certain point, I remember I still being a believer at this point, and somebody said, well, the Nauvoo Expositor printing all these lies about Joseph Smith. And I said, all right, I'm going to read this and I'm going to find the lies. And I couldn't find anything that was really technically a lie in there, right? In fact, the opposite. These were insider people. William Law, well-respected, well-regarded person who was well aware of some of these things happening. And they also, at some point about a year ago, somebody read the whole Nauvoo Expositor on a podcast, and I listened. I remember at one point they said, we have even bigger things to reveal in the coming episodes, right? Or more specifics or whatever. And they didn't get there, right? And it's one of those things that, just tends to make a person look very guilty, right? Who has been lying about the wives they have and lying to the public about, their participation in plural marriage and all that. Again, I'm getting off track. I do that. I apologize. But the later stuff was what bothered me first, but I always held on to the earlier stuff, right? And it kind of moved backwards in that sense. And then at a certain point, and this is getting specific now, that there's two things the final week of May 2016, before I just stopped believing, was I heard a podcast called How to Build a Transoceanic Vessel by Mormon Expressions podcast. And the panelists, they had a lady on there who her expertise was in like Norse shipbuilding and stuff like that. And it's fascinating because they go through what would it have taken for Nephi to build this boat in a real practical sense, right? And to me, where the Book of Mormon steps on its own foot or kicks itself in the butt, or whatever expression, I don't know, is that they could have just said, and lo, the family walked down to the shore, and there was the boat that the Lord provided. They could have said that, but no, they say that Nephi smelted and built and did all these things. And you realize, the kind of, okay, all things are possible with the Lord, right? That at a certain point that doesn't become sufficient, right? For the sense of reality of it. So that was one thing. I recommend that podcast, whether you believe or not. I recommend it'd be a good challenge to listen to that. And I be curious to hear your take on that. But the other thing was an article I read, can't remember where, but it had to do with phony things in history. Like there was early 1900s, there was a fossil found. I can't remember what it was called. They named it something Archaeopteryx or something like that. And wow, unbelievable, this crazy creature, right? Sort of half dinosaur, half something or other. And the person who had found this was celebrated and did tours and everything. And then they found out that it was pieced together from 3 different fossils, right? And then other fraudulent works. The article was talking about several things that they all tended to be things that were pieced together, right? And when I read that, I had this, everything I'd been reading about the Book of Mormon, about Joseph Smith in general, really, I feel like he was an expert at sort of taking in things from society and adapting them to his movement, his cause. One quick example is he becomes a Freemason, and a month or two later, 80% of the temple ceremony is the same wording as the Freemason ceremony, right? But there's several other examples of that. But then the Book of Mormon, like, this is going to sound like an insult, and I hope it doesn't, because I think it's, at least from a critical point of view, I think it's accurate. I think it's biblical fan fiction, right? And again, I know that sounds bad, like I'm not. I think it's actually, for what it is, I think it's a great example of that. Like it accomplishes that well, right? But I do think that's what it is, and I don't think he plagiarized from other sources other than the Bible, which there's a lot of plagiarism and rewording of things in there, which is something that when I read through it in 2015, that's what I kept noticing. I was like, why does this sound? Why did this person in 500 BC, in the New World, why did he say almost the exact same thing as Paul did in 30 AD in Israel, right? And there's just a ton of that in there. But I do think you can see a lot of influences in the Book of Mormon that, to me, describe something that was essentially pieced together. And not, again, I think a lot of it is interesting, and some of it is edifying and good for what it is. But I did come to that conclusion in May of 2016 that it was not what it claimed to be, and that, as simple as that was enough for me to say, okay, I don't believe this anymore.
Well, we have an hour. I can.
Oh, geez, I'm sorry.
Questions about everything, and but I don't know what your schedule's like. If you've got a few more minutes to consider.
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. You're supposed to go like, okay, come on, stop.
No, I was enthralled and fascinated. And
remember when I said I was just going to keep it to the bare? No, I totally didn't. I'm sorry. I'm very interested in the whole part. I really appreciate how much you obviously throughout your life studied these things, researched them both on the way in and on the way out, and you're thinking about their application to your life, and so it was all just fascinating, and I really appreciate you sharing. From a historical standpoint, since, as you pointed out earlier, that you married my aunt, who's only 3 years and 1 day older than I am, when in the process of all this did she pass away? Would have been before the meat of it, 2013, June of 2013. And again, for me personally, it had started, the questions were certainly there at that point. I think of it sort of as a whack-a-mole kind of thing. Problem comes in, you find something that lets you move on from that, and then something else pops up. I also found that I would compartmentalize things. I think we do that a lot. I know I did that, and other people said, yeah, where, okay, I have kind of an answer for this problem. Okay. And I have kind of an answer for this problem, and this
Yeah.
one, and this 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 one. And at a certain point, I had to realize that I had 743 compartmentalized things, the answers of which wouldn't harmonize with each other,
Yeah.
and that became a problem.
So when you started the story and your process talking about looking for some meaning and some spirituality, uh, do you still seek that? How do you see the spiritual experiences that you have had in relationship to who you are and into life? And what is your current?
Yeah.
This could take another hour to describe, but
No,
what
I know.
on?
I'm so sorry. I just start talking and the
No,
time goes by. What do you know? but yeah, good question. And the short answer is, yeah, I'm still a seeker. Absolutely. I reluctantly call myself an atheist, but I don't, I'm just a human who doesn't practice a religion. I think that's the simpler way to say it. I think I like to think something's going on, and maybe we can, gain some insight from it. I'm open to all kinds of possibilities, maybe more in the metaphysical realm. Maybe our consciousness, was one thing recently that I thought, well, this could be interesting. Maybe we're all just maybe there's just one universal consciousness, and we're all, like a prism uh, shoots light out in different directions. Maybe we're just different light reflections of that. You get to be the Steve Hunt light. I get to be the Eric Endres light of that. But maybe we're all just part of this.
Would you more say that you feel you actively believe there is probably something like that, or that you actively believe there probably isn't, or that you really just don't know? Like, how would you?
Yeah, I really don't know. Like at various times in my life, sometimes I'll be driving down the road and suddenly I just get this weird sense of how big everything is. And I remember I have to be careful. Okay. Like I am just a speck on a speck in a solar system that is a speck of super speck in a galaxy, which is a super speck in a universe, which could be a speck in a infinite number of universes. I mean, really, that's the reality, that we are in that reality right now. Everything that we're doing right now is this reality. And I think that's amazing and it's wondrous. And that's the kind of thing I keep, yeah, I'd love to know what it is. But, as far as, specific religions, I feel like most of the world's, I think there's some truth in a lot of them, right? Mormonism has some interesting ideas, absolutely. I think it's possible that people have had near-death experiences or things and come back, and they bring, like you mentioned with your grandfather, they bring this idea of, and maybe there's something real in there, maybe, right? I'm open to all of that, right? But in the here and now, I have to live and conduct my life in a way that is, harmonious with what I consider some sense of reality, right? And
So I'm going to jump back to your very first spiritual experience that you mentioned,
sure,
the
yeah,
hits of acid and whatever, heading
yeah,
into school on that day.
yeah.
And I asked you if you felt it was, a spiritual experience.
Mm.
What do you make of that on a spiritual level or scientific? Do you feel like, is
Well,
it?
what I would say is that's how I interpreted it, and because I didn't really have any better way to interpret it, and I don't know that I still do, right? But we all have moments that feel important. I still feel the spirit as I would have described it, 6 years ago, in
What do
different
you think
ways,
about that?
listening to music and stuff like that, right?
What's your interpretation of those moments still as you feel that now?
Something that I connect with or feel is important in some way, and it resonates in some way.
Does that have any metaphysical meaning to it to you, or is it entirely?
It might, and I think if you had asked me this 3 years ago, I'd be different. Like today, I'm sort of in this sort of like middle ground. Like, I don't know, maybe, yeah. I'm not opposed to the idea of there being a spiritual realm or that we have souls. Like maybe, like, well, for one thing, we wouldn't be able to detect those things. I know it's one of those things. As an apologist, you say, well, we haven't found these things yet. It doesn't mean they don't exist, right? And it's not the strongest way to make an argument, but I'm not opposed to the idea that maybe that first thing that you were when your parents conceived you, that first cell that was you at one point, that was all you were, right? Maybe that's still going to be something, or maybe that's I don't know. We're in these, I don't know. I'm trying to meet you on some level that I think is possible, right? I just at a certain point felt like the practice of the specific religion that I was part of was not something that I felt I should continue with.
So just I'm thinking I've had a few lightning round questions pop into my head.
All right.
But
can I answer them in lightning fast? We'll see. I don't know.
That would be the idea, but you don't have to. But I also don't know that I can remember them all because they've kind of popped in and out. And
okay. And then I kept blabbing, and then you forgot them. But.
Yeah. What do you believe that leadership of the church at the highest levels are in the know of a con, are practicing and executing a con, or do they believe what they preach?
I believe they believe. Yes, I believe they believe.
Do you, and then I would jump that back to those who were around Joseph at the time. Were they believing and following him? He was conning all of them and they were believing, or that somewhere in the know?
I think that's a grayer area. I think you could look at certain specific people. Maybe Oliver was part of it. I don't have a hard belief on that. I have different theories about different things, which I think are interesting, but speculative.
This one connects to your, whether you believe there's probably something or not. So this may be the same answer, but just generally life after death. What do you think happens after we die?
This is going to sound like a cop-out, but it doesn't matter right now. So that's where I've come to. For it used to be, and largely, I think somebody said, I can't remember who it was, but they said a lot of life for humans is just dealing with the fact that we're going to die someday, right? And I think I actually religion is a great thing for that, right? It's an excellent thing for that, and I mean that sincerely. Right? It helps you. It helps you to not worry about that, right? And not think about that. I think where I've come to in some sense is whether I believe there is a thing or not doesn't matter, because it either is or isn't going to happen, right? And none of my believing it changes that, right? I think, at least, objectively speaking, some part of me is going to live again because of whatever the universal, this is how it is, or not because of however universal it is.
The only way that it actually matters is if there is some specific thing you're supposed to do or believe or say in order to do certain or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Some rule.
Yeah. And I do, also think that I've followed, if there is a eternal being that is in control of everything, they should know that I have followed the best possible
Doing the
path that
best
I
you can.
have. What's that?
You're doing the best you can. That in
Yeah, I
general,
followed the
if they
best
wanted you to do
possible.
something else, they would make it known to you very clearly, and you'll do it because you're willing to do it, but you just haven't seen it.
And I prayed and prayed, and I absolutely wanted to continue believing. That was the easier path, to continue to believe and continue. That was another thing about my bishop. I don't mean to bag on my bishop. He's a great guy. But that thing that he posted that I mentioned earlier about people losing faith was also, there was something about, something about it. It's being as if it were easier to leave and just do whatever you want and sin and be happy. No, that was not the easier path. It was,
What was your favorite thing, would you say, looking back, about the Latter-day Saint Church?
Well, just numerous experiences, and people, I don't have any strong regrets. I mean, I'm a white straight male, so that, there's that privilege or whatever, but if there's a thing I miss the most, it's the music, right? And just like some of those specific hymns I love the melodies of, and the words of, and everything. But I will tell you that the last week that I went, because I tried to go for a few weeks after I stopped believing, they sang "Praise to the Man," and that was not what I wanted to hear in that moment.
So do you, I mean, are you okay with listening to some of those hymns and just enjoying them? Is there a problem with that in your mind?
No, yeah. I barely have, like, I don't know, at a few points I've been at someone's house, or, our family or whatever, and I heard, and yeah, I'm not opposed to hearing them. No, that's
I'm just saying, because if that was what you kind of were attracted to, or that you remember most fondly, it seems like
I'm just saying that's something I really miss.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you don't have to miss it though. You can
Right. Okay. Oh, good point. You're right. No, yeah, and same with Christmas hymns, right? I don't really have, I appreciate Jesus as an idea. I'm not sure if he was a real person. I'm kind of, a little
I
bit.
was going to ask that as the next question, is kind of,
Okay.
Originally through this, you first found kind of more Jesus, and you appreciated him and his teaching. And so the question is, as you fell back out of the church, why not fall back on that, and instead of just completely, I don't know, nothing? What was there any?
Tried to, and a lot of the same critical things about Mormonism and the Book of Mormon fall back on the Bible as well, right? And in fact, that's another thing about the Book of Mormon, is it actually relies on some things in the Bible, Tower of Babel, etc., that I don't believe happened, right? So I still have a lot of reverence is a word that I hesitate to use, I guess, but I still have a lot of appreciation for the idea of Jesus, right? And I think, was he an actual person? I don't know. I'm maybe leaning towards not, based on a number of things I've read the last few years, that it's questionable whether there was an actual person, or whether it was kind of amalgamation or creation. But nonetheless, a rebel who is about helping others and loving each other, and standing up against hypocrisy and the Pharisees, right? Still a great character. If I
superhero is.
Yeah, no, and one of the best ever. I mean, boy, that they say the greatest story ever told. I still, I wouldn't argue against that, right? But now I more think of it as a story, right? So that would be the distinction.
Do you feel like the church helped then with your addiction? You mentioned that in the process as well.
It was uniquely helpful that, coming out of where I came from, I happened to go also back into a teetotaling a completely teetotaling religion. Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, considering the time, I don't know that I want to dive into a bunch more. I've really enjoyed, and I've got more that I want to ask and more that I want to learn. But with a few minutes that we have, is there anything specific that you felt you wanted to ask me or learn from me, or not? Well, not learn from me, but ask me about my situation or anything like that, or?
Yeah. For one thing, first of all, I want to say thank you. And for anybody watching this, Steve has tried to twist my arm a few times to come and do this kind of thing and to talk in this discussion group. And I resisted, and I resisted. I overreached on my resistance. I totally admit that. And I should have known, because I know Steve and his family my whole life, that it wasn't going to be contentious or any kind of thing where he's trying to change. He's trying to understand where I come from, and that's awesome. That is awesome.
Like,
I did tell him,
twist your arm. I said, I apologize if it's felt like I've been trying to twist your arm.
Well, no, one thing I'll say, and this will sound like a criticism, but I mean it as a compliment, is you can be intense. Be a little intense, but that's awesome. And you have a great energy, and I really appreciate it. And I should say, when I left the church, I was really resistant to talk too much about it, because unlike Daniel, who you interviewed a few weeks ago, I had learned from a different person who had left a few years prior, not to do some of the things that Daniel said.
Yeah, that's the question I missed, is looking back, what would you have done differently? Both, I mean, you can talk, if you've got a couple minutes to share, what would you have done differently inside the church and or on your way out and since then?
Inside the church, I don't know if I'd have done anything differently. I tried to be a voice of, going back to when I first joined, the cultural doctrine always bothered me, right? So I never, the thing about you got to wear a white shirt and you got to do these things and like that. And that's all cultural doctrine to me. And I never liked it, and I never followed it. Right. So I kind of, and I think it was important to be a person that could represent something a little different. I had a beard for several years, and it's just things like that. Right. And I always found some of that to be pharisaical, and without being that guy who's, in the back of the meeting room, well, this and that, I hope I wasn't that. I don't think I was, but I tried to be a voice for a broader sense of what Mormonism could be, and as I felt should be. Right. And I see other people doing that very successfully. And I wanted to be more inclusive to LGBT members and all of that. And at a certain point, you think, well, can I represent that from within? And the difference for me was I didn't feel that I could do that once I didn't believe anymore, because then I was sort of like an agent, not a true agent, or so. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but so while I still believe,
as long as you're believing, you still feel like you're a member and you're believing you're a part of this, you can criticize, constructively. But once you feel like I'm an outsider, then you feel like I'm kind of a spy here. What am I trying to do?
Yeah, there was a little bit of that. Sure. Yep. And and I don't feel like I was critical. It was more just about offering but okay, but also what about this? Like that kind of thing, right? And I think you guys do that a lot too, actually. So, offering different takes on, even if it's just as simple as that. When I left the church, is there anything I would do different? There's a person who very, very well, I'm not going to say her name, but she's kind of a motherly figure to you, you might say.
Member.
And I was very close to her. I still, am, I think, I hope. But she was the first person I told about this, and I know it, and it ended up hurting her a lot. And I think I'd have maybe approached that differently. And the thing that I'm more realizing recently is, so one of the things I think I did well, that I look back and I said, yeah, I'm glad I did this, is when I told everybody at large, it was via a Facebook post, and I crumbled up the first thing I wrote, right, which was a kind of more narrative thing. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to answer the questions, because I had talked to 5 or 6 people about this prior to that, and they had all the same questions, or a lot of the same questions, right? And so I think, if I let people know about this, I'm going to keep getting all these same questions. So here, I'm just going to post the answers, right? And I didn't post specifics. I've talked about some specifics today. In the context of my story, it's valid, I think, but I didn't post any specifics. I just said I don't believe anymore in the truth claims of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then I answered all these other questions. I think that was good. And the boundaries thing was important. There were boundaries in there, like, unlike Daniel said in his thing, at that point, I did not want people sending me church articles and all these things, right? Mainly because I had read them all. I had read all that stuff for the past 3 or 4 years, right? I can guarantee you that there wasn't going to be anything new at that point that I hadn't already, tried to assimilate, tried to process. But I also realized that I closed the door on, like, you were one of the very few people I recall at that day that I posted that, who said, I would like to talk to you about some of this stuff. I think I had said, like, I don't really want to talk about it, but if you do, maybe we can do that at some point, right? So you've been twisting my arm, so to speak, for ever since that point, right? And but I closed a lot of it down, and then there's one person in particular who's very, very close to me still, and you know her very well, also a different person, but I'm not going to say her name, but she's very close to our family and important to our family and to my 2 daughters. And I knew that she was going to have a very, very difficult time about all of this. And I didn't want to challenge her with any of this, right? She's an older woman, right? And it's not something I wanted, like, this is your whole life. I don't want you to go through what I've gone through. I want you to have good feelings about what you believe. I don't want to challenge that. But there came several times in the first couple of years when, I'd send my daughters over to stay with her or visit her or something. And then I'd hear things about, I'm trying very hard not to say who it is. Well, this person asked me if I'm following the law of chastity, if I still believe the 10 Commandments, if I, all these things, and there's a lot of political things involved, right? And I remember just repeatedly having to remind this person of those boundaries that I said to begin with, right? Well, more recently, I think I found that was too much. That was an overreach on my part, because, we were all walking on eggshells around each other in terms of our conversations and things like that, right? I know that this is important to her. I know that these things are important to her, and it's, there's still interest for me. Like, it was, and in some respects is, a part of my life still. And what I found, so we had this great conversation last fall when, I realized, what, my daughters are 16 and 18 now, and they have minds of their own, and they will let you know the minds of their own. Right. And so, you know what? You can tell them anything you want, political or religious. But as long as you accept that they're going to respond to you honestly about their mind. And you may not like some of what they say. Some of it may conflict with what you think their lifestyle should be, their choices, their morality, those kinds of things. And you know what? If you can accept that, then great. And she did, and she has, and it's, and same for me too. Like I realized, okay, we can have conversations about some of this stuff. And I understand I'm not, it's not going to crumble your testimony. It certainly shouldn't, right? If you have a strong testimony, it shouldn't. And it's still something I don't offer. Like I don't go there like, hey, let's talk about this. But, she is inclined to, and has been over and over inclined to. And now I feel like, oh, I shouldn't have closed that off the way I did, for her sake, and really for all of our sakes.
And this ties in with the next question I had been wanting to ask, which was simply how strongly, kind of on a scale of 1 to 10, would you feel is the feeling inside you that you should or need to or want to inform other Latter-day Saints of what you've discovered, and that they should step away too, or make changes or anything? Where would you say that feeling is?
I would say it's fairly close to 0. And
has it changed over the years at all?
A little bit, yes. And I think Daniel spoke of this too. You in first feeling things, you just like, man, everybody should know about this stuff. I think the most I would say, and the person I mentioned before, who the first person I mentioned that really, really well, she was a great example of this. I'm going to tell you the story because initially she was not happy about my Facebook post. She didn't read it, but she heard about it. And somebody told her that I had done this big anti-Mormon post. And I remember telling her, I said, if that was anti-Mormon, I don't know, I think that person really skewed how they read it. Okay. But nonetheless, she was upset, and she wanted to know about my daughters, where they were with things. And I told them, I was willing to drive them to church if they wanted to keep going. I told them what I felt, and I said they have to decide for themselves. My younger daughter told me she hadn't believed anyway for a long time, so that turned out to be easy. Okay, she had been playing along for several years. My older daughter, it was upsetting to her, and it was something. And I said, these are some of the things that I read, and I listed, see what you think. And some of that was apologetics, right? And the person, I'm very carefully not using her name, but she mentioned the CES letter, right? Was that one of the things? And I said, it was in there. It's not, to me, that's, I found other things to be better sourced or whatever, but that was in there. And there's also the Fair Mormon response to that. And then there's also Jeremy Runnels' response to the Fair, and I said, you got to, read through the whole gist of it there. And to her credit, she did, or I don't know if she read every word of it. Probably. No, yes, and also the person I'm referring to, and this is where I'm getting to, the person that very, very well, who had been upset with me and all that about everything. She contacted me a week or so later and said, "Yeah, I read this and I read this and I read this. It's all really pretty messy, but I choose to believe." Mm-hmm. And I said, there you go. That's it. I have nothing more to say. I can't, and so that's kind of where I mostly fall down. I was like, I understand religion. I understand the good things about it, the positive connections and things it creates for people. I think at a certain point, I would say, are you aware of this, and this? Are you? Oh, okay. And you still choose to believe? Okay. All right. Yeah. If you're not aware of this, and this, maybe you should be. Like that's as far as I would go on that. Does that answer the question?
Sure. It seems like
Because
too, I want to throw in there that also if you're aware of these things, you still choose to believe, that's great until you really push and really try to get other people, then there is a little bit of and I'm not saying just doing some missionary work. And let me share something that's made a big effect on my life, that's blessed me, that's made me happy. And
sure.
here's the message and the story and the way of living, and all that can be beneficial. But when I'm just speaking now, I'm kind of tying this out with other systems of belief that people can be aware of the messiness of their system of belief, choose to believe it anyway, and then try to enforce that belief on other people or whatever. And that becomes a highly problematic.
At a certain point, I don't know if you're talking about kind of like nuanced members, or like there's at a certain point, you're still a member, but you have this different type of belief. Now, if you think everyone else should have that, is that what you're saying?
I'm actually referring to anything from all kinds of religions that where people are more fanatical about
Oh, sure. Yeah.
or political positions or whatever. I'm simply talking about just because we've come to this moment here where you mentioned someone said this to you and that you determined that this is okay. When someone is aware of the messiness of their beliefs and yet still chooses to believe, you kind of just sit back and say that's fine. And I'm agreeing with you on that, and then saying, except for when they decide to be fanatics about it.
Sure. Gotcha.
And,
Okay. I have definitely been, in certain circles, ex-Mormon circles on Reddit, and I've written some songs that are critical and stuff like that. And one of the things, I'm critical. I have been critical of the church, and what I realized is in some senses I didn't have an outlet for that the first year or so after leaving. Like I needed to talk, because I chose in a lot of ways to not talk about it for, I think, good reasons in a lot of cases. But
my comment here wasn't about you at all, just so you know.
What's that?
No, I said my comment.
No,
wasn't
I know. But I'm kind of following up what I was saying further is admitting that I have not been perfect either. There's something I said to you on Facebook a month or two ago, and it was kind of out of the blue. This thing, this little, what about Joseph Smith? Didn't he lie about this? I don't even remember what it was, and it was like, man. Although for me it felt weird, because really the last year or so I felt more removed from that than I had the first couple of years, and not feeling any kind of need to poke in those ways or whatever. But
that's a decent example since you bring it up, just simply of what I was commenting in that particular Facebook post was against some false beliefs, some lies that were being spread, and trying to say that this is wrong for people to have these lies spread to them, and then that they believe them, and that they go around and teach them to everybody else. And your comment was, well, isn't essentially, in short, isn't that what Joseph Smith did too? So my response was simply, I don't believe that's what he did, but we can talk about it. So
right.
Well, but absolutely, if that is what he had done, I think I would try to feel the same way. Like you say, it's important for us to know. I mean, we had a discussion about this in the open face discussion. I don't know that you were a part of, but just this general idea of how important is it to us to know the truth about all of these things versus, are there things that are useful to believe, whether they're true or not? Are there, how do we form our ethics and our values? How do we teach that and pass it on to our children? And one particular example that we had was this story about two babies switched at birth in a hospital who were raised until they were 42 years old, not knowing they'd been switched at birth, although one of their mothers knew. This is a true story. And she tried, she was timid. Her husband, who also had told her husband, this was all on This American Life on NPR. But anyway, her husband had told her to just drop it, just leave it, and they knew that the two families knew each other distantly. And so the mother, who knew she had the wrong baby, watched her biological baby grow for the 42 years and kept an eye on her and occasionally said things to the other mother about, do you ever think our children were switched at birth? Do you ever think, what do you, and the other mother just thought she was crazy, just
Wow.
anyway. And then the question then, at least I won't get into the whole, you can look it up. It's one of the top This American Life stories, or whatever, but switched at birth. But the thing that we wanted to talk about was, would you want to know? And what would that do? How would that change you and your life, the way you've been living, your relationship to your biological mother, your relationship? If you were the child, would you want to know? And what if you were the mother of the other mother who had raised this child for 42 years, and then she's now 62 when she finds out that her daughter is not her biological daughter, and all I'm saying is everybody in the circle agreed we would want to know the truth. We would want to know what was actually true. The question is, and the differences sprang up. What would we do about it? How much would it matter? How much would we say, what, I think I'm still going to stick with, I still have a relationship here and I'm going to stay right where I am, and is that wrong of us to, to decide, I'll try to have a decent relationship with my biological mother. I'll talk to her, but I still am going to be closer to the family I was raised with for 42 years, all just fascinating. I appreciate your time. I hope we can chat again, maybe getting deeper into different aspects of this. Real quick, sure. Here's a lightning round one, because we've been talking about this on our back channel stuff, but Are you deterministic or free will? Determinism or free will?
Free will. Okay. I think we're writing the story of the universe as we speak, although, there's been a lot of talk. I read Yuval Harari, and I saw Devs, this series. I don't know if you saw that. I recommend it, where it's saying maybe we don't have as much as we thought, but I like to think, hey, you weren't expecting that, right? I wasn't expecting that I would do that, but I don't know. I like to think that we shape life. And maybe it's such a small way, again, we're that speck on the speck, right?
No, it's just interesting. I asked that question because in our group, we have one conservative Christian who would call himself deterministic. And then we have an atheist who would say deterministic, totally opposite sides. And now you're non-believer atheist saying, free will. And of course we have religious saying free will. So it's interesting that we can fall on either side of that.
I think hugely influenced by things, and environment plays a huge factor. What would be we do a lot subconsciously without really being aware of it. Even things that we think we're making choices. Well, we were probably going to do that thing, So, but I do ultimately. I like to think that I'm running some kind of show inside here that. That
feels like it
controls the rest of this, but even that may be totally delusional. We'll see.
And then another one we've discussed a lot, what would be the highest source of truth and knowledge and epistemology, how do we know what we know in the shortest explanation you can? Where would you say is the best reliable source of knowledge?
Oh boy. Well, again, completely subjective. Your experience and your, for you is the best source, right? As far as outside world, everything out here, I do think science has a better method than many things for coming to some truths or being useful. I would say, science will correct itself, and it will, be able to examine things and so I can't remember Hitchens or one of those guys that said if all the science books were ever destroyed and all the religious books were ever destroyed, we would eventually rewrite most of those science books because they'd still be accurate. They'd still have the same formulas would still be the same, right? and religion, we'd have a whole new slew of religious books, which might be fun, but
That's interesting. I appreciate that. I kind of just to wrap it up here, I want to go with that for a second because I have thought about that myself. In fact, I think I put it into at least a journal entry, if not something that I published somewhere. But the idea of, yeah, if we were to lose all that we know or think we know or have received about God and religion, and all of that would disappear, what would come back? As you said, I would agree with you that eventually the science books would come back. And as far as religion, I personally believe that we would establish, or what would be the same would be this idea of love one another, of love your neighbor, of
I would love it. I think it's a good idea. Let's
well, I'm just saying that would come back in all of these new religions because it's found in all of the religions that are there right now.
Do unto others. Yep.
Yeah. The idea of, love your neighbor as yourself, that second great commandment,
So you're right. What I said is thank you, because you're saying that to some extent, the important aspects of religion would be rewritten again.
Yeah, which is one way that I like to look at that and say that is a great truth. It seems to be found in every major religion, and it's not something that you're going to scientifically find, come up with or test. There are reasons why it's, socially and Darwinian, whatever, evolutionarily good to love each other, but it's going to come back as a major tenet of ethics and values and whatever. And then, as I said, what will only come back through that by the hand of God, by revelation, by the appearance of God, Jesus Christ, angels, and Holy Ghost things, is this idea that that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and Savior and Redeemer and whatever. I've said that would require actual revelation from God to come back. And so, just as a quick side note, this is something into a peek into my views.
Yeah.
What I feel like is that then describes to me what is the most important role of, say, a prophet or of somebody who is teaching the gospel, is since that truth doesn't come by any other way other than through revelation, well, then that, in my opinion, ought to be the revelation that people are getting, is this idea of Jesus is the Son of God. So anyway, that's just a side note.
I don't remember where it was, maybe the back channel chat of your group here or whatever, but I liked what you expanded on that earlier recently, and I liked it a lot. That's what the role of a prophet should be, just to communicate the love aspect. Like let's
And so I guess what I'm saying is that when Jesus says that the first great commandment is to love God, my opinion on what that means is leading people specifically to belief in Jesus Christ, because according to my faith, that's the way to obtain salvation. Is, I'm going to get a little bit, but is this idea of, I want to be saved, because God will not force us to be saved. I think that he is allowing us that agency. So we have this, I want to be saved, and I believe that Jesus Christ can do it. Like I can't, and so this loving God is this idea of leading people to the Savior. Anyway, and what I'm saying is, this is a little critical, but it's how I deal with the problems of my religion, the messiness that you talked about earlier, is this simple idea that prophets in general, in my opinion and belief and study, should be encouraging us to believe in Jesus Christ, and also to love one another, those two great commandments. And almost anything that is said beyond that is their personal human attempt to either do those things or to otherwise lead us in a way they think is appropriate.
But which may or may not be, right?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. They can be making mistakes and whatever. But anything beyond telling us to love God and telling us to love each other tends to be, I would say, their opinion, and so that it doesn't mean it's a bad opinion. It means it's something I can truly consider. And it also doesn't mean that it's, prophetic. So anyway, I appreciate the time though here with you.
Yeah. Me too. Thank you very much. You are generous and a good interviewer, and
Well,
you are. I
I mean,
appreciate that you offer this to people like me and people like Daniel and Joey and anybody, because I know that you want to understand other faiths, because faith is important to you, and it does apply to me and Daniel, who don't practice a faith, but it's still an important aspect of our lives, or has been, and is still. But thank you,
yeah,
Steve. Love you.
yeah. Thank you. Love you too.